Hi, Sandy.
Amy, we are back, episode 4.
Episode 4. It's like we just keep rocking on. I need to do a count of how many we've done.
I'm totally going to do
I,
that. I had that on my list because I needed that for something to say, okay, season 5, how many episodes? So I will be in charge of that and I will report back to everyone.
okay. I'm curious because we've been knocking them out over the years. Okay, so how's everything going?
Everything is going great, enjoying fall. I do have to tell you, I enjoyed our podcast on AI, and it seems like that keeps coming up in conversation. So, not that I want to circle back, but when we talk about podcasts, the good, the bad, and the ugly, you had exchanged a text with me on something, but right after we taped and dropped, there was a big, and I don't know if you saw this, people were getting their high school yearbook photos. So they go into AI, and that's one of the options. And so, did you see people posting what AI came up with them for their high school? So that was, I don't know if
No.
any of the listeners had done that. I felt like after seeing my son last Christmas sending me 100, and then you sending me more, I think I've seen enough of myself on AI. And going back to my high school yearbooks, but there were some real interesting ones and comments on how AI saw them as they would have looked and done behaved in high school. So
So that's so fascinating to me. Did anyone say, "Oh my gosh, that looks just like I did," or not? Was it completely
it
off?
was the look, and it went back and forth. So some of the posts I saw that were like, oh, that was spot on, but they were always doing something. So it wasn't just the look, it was also like journalism, or they also were picking up on what AI was picking up, what they thought would be tendencies of what you'd be participating in high school. So it was the
Interesting.
look and I guess the background to the photo. So, but it was a mixed bag, which is I think basically what we came up with AI is it's a mixed bag. And based off of the fact that that was 2 episodes ago, and there's been so much, it's evolving and it's becoming more mainstream, not just for fun. So maybe does that maybe bring back the ugly part of what you saw?
Oh, just,
Read.
the use of it in social media. These boys in Spain, right after we taped, I came across that article of in Spain, there was a lawsuit against, or these boys were getting charged because they took um, pornographic photos and put these young teenage girls' faces on those photos. And so, just so they were all being charged. This was in Spain, and
Right.
it happened like right after we stopped taping. I was like, oh my gosh, look at that. I'm just, and so I will say I saw something recently. It's like the wild, wild west. AI is the wild, wild west right now. Like it can go, it's all over the place.
So I'm going to make one mental note. This is more than a mental note because I'm saying it. I'm making a note that when we're on the last episode of the season, we're just going to bring up AI and see where it's evolved just in that time frame.
Oh my gosh, great idea.
Yeah.
I am completely fascinated by it because, like you mentioned, the regression, and I see I could talk about AI out the whole. We're going to change subjects. We're going to go somewhere else. But
Right.
you were talking about the regression. You think about children who are missing and how accurately they could forecast like what they look like 10 years later, possibly if they had been missing for 10 years. I don't know. That's why I was wondering how accurate it was. It would be interesting.
And note too, we always have our contact in the show notes or in our podcast. If any of the listeners have anything to comment, articles to share, tell us, please,
Yes.
because it is a very fascinating subject. But
Yes.
today we are talking about non-AI change. How about that?
Yeah. We're talking about change, choosing change, and maybe why we don't choose change and new things and just,
And when we should.
yeah. So, Sandy, you kind of brought this, your mom made you think of this.
My mom, so my mom is 79 and she's very active. But, what I was observing, which I think we observe at all ages, as we get older, sometimes the phrase is you get stuck in your ways, but you also get comfortable in how things are. And I have watched an evolution with my mom because she had decided she was in an arthritic class. I'm not saying that right. Arthritis class which is basically Silver Sneakers for older people at her gym. And to my dad's thumbs up to my dad, she was complaining about how people weren't really improving and people were talking too much and just a variety of different things that were bothering her about the class because there wasn't a lot of progression, right? And my dad said to her, well, you can change that by doing something different. You can't change what other people do, but you can. So she completely went back to classes that aren't for older people. She does a boot camp. And she modifies down to her level, but she goes to all the mainstream classes. And I saw her have a new outlook on life because she decided to make a change because she wanted to be better. And she made the funny comment of, boy, she used to be the top of the class, like the superstar of Silver Sneakers, because she was very active. And now she's the bottom of the class. So it was humbling. So I thought, gosh, isn't that a good lesson for all of us? Sometimes change isn't easy because we not only have we become very comfortable, we've also really good. So if we're going to change it up, there's some vulnerability there, right? To not being the best. And then the second thing with her is that motivated her too. When she made that change and she was re-energized and enjoying the classes and seeing the progress, she decided to go Apple for the first time in her life. And she spends a ton of time on her computer because she does family stories and genealogy and research and YouTube videos. And so she bought her first Mac and she is all over it and converting over. And her comment to me is, you know what, you can teach an old dog new tricks. So this really got my brain going on her example and how we do at different facets in our life become comfortable in what we do and we don't seek out change. I use a phrase a lot, boy, that ship has sailed. Garrett will say, oh, we should try this. I'll be, oh, that ship has sailed, meaning, what, should have done it a long time ago. But maybe that ship hasn't sailed, right? Maybe instead of thinking that ship has sailed, being more open-minded to change. So that's my background story. Amy, what are you thinking?
I love it. I so admire your mom. I've never met your mom, but she inspires me all the time. The stories that you share. Um, I love it. I think change is very healthy. And I was doing some research on it because I was like, is it just me that intuitively thinks that change is good for us not to get um, so predictable and so root that we don't experience anything else? It's just, and having comfort in that. And so I started doing research on that, and there is some science behind the change and how it's good for your brain. Now, the flip side of that is too much change can become overwhelming. So being careful to pick what you're changing and because I'm thinking about my life last fall when I had so much going on change wise. I had change in the organization I was volunteering for, and change in my work, my job, and we moved. And like one of my kids, there was a lot going on. So it was like I threw all these balls in the air and I just had to take a breath and see how they were all going to land because I didn't know what it looked like from October through January. It was like,
Right.
ooh, I don't know what this is all going to look like. So we'll see. And that can get overwhelming. And my mom was messaging me. She's like, Amy, you need to take care of your health because right now you've got so much going on that you need to make sure you're eating well and exercising and have that self-care aspect because she thought my heart was gonna go, like I was gonna go into AFib because that's a family. Well, that's what's happened to her when she got in a high
Right.
stress. so she was
Right.
worried about my
I
heart.
love that.
But
She's acknowledging everything that's going on and saying, okay, look out for yourself first
yeah,
to make
it
sure
was
you're okay.
interesting though. I hadn't even realized how big everything was until she said that. And then I was like, oh yeah, okay. Okay, take a breath.
We
There's a
got
lot
this.
going on. You're right. Exactly. So change, it's interesting. So you mentioned being vulnerable and talk a little bit more about that. Like the vulnerability, like why do you have to be vulnerable to change?
I don't know if you have to be vulnerable, you have to know that there's a chance that you're going to be vulnerable with it, right? Because with change, there's an unknown. And with an unknown, there's an exposure, right? So I don't know if it always happens, but I think you have to be ready for it and know that you go from comfort to uncomfortable. My mom's example being the bottom of the class, or buying the Mac and being so overwhelmed that you have to ask for help because my husband spent a lot of time with her on Zoom and showing her around and trying to move things over. We all know what happens with technology. But you have to be vulnerable. And there's another side to the vulnerability. When you change, sometimes what you change to, what you came from, doesn't look so bad, right? So what could
Right.
have happened, back to being vulnerable, is my mom could have gone to the new boot camp and the new yoga classes, and she could have found that she was not enjoying them, that the grass wasn't as greener on the other side, that she found herself more prone to injury. So the vulnerability would have lied in her going back to the Sober Seekers classes. And there'll probably be a time when she will need to go back to those. And there's that uncomfortableness of saying, wow, do I look like I made a bad choice? That's another side of vulnerability. And sometimes when we do change, we find that we become more grateful because maybe what we left wasn't so bad, right? Or what we changed to really wasn't what we wanted. So change doesn't always end in a happy ending. Wow, I made change. This is great. Look at me. I did it. It was really hard and I get this great reward in the end, because part of the vulnerability is it might not be what we actually wanted, right?
Right. So I love everything you just said because it's so true. I think there's this vulnerability of being wrong, that you made the wrong
Right.
choice, and people judging you. And one of the things that I read in one of these articles is that change humbles you. And I think that is so true because it gets you outside your comfort zone. And here, this is what it says. Aside from fear, pride is another hindrance to trying new things. The feeling of being vulnerable and probably learning from someone below your status is a humbling effect. Regardless of your achievement, wealth, connection, experience, you are always a beginner when you try new things. It
I love
teaches you
that.
patience to learn, to listen, and grow. Yes, you're always a beginner when you try new things. And sometimes that's uncomfortable, like to walk in and like you think about AI and us researching and trying AI. Well, if we were 10 years down the road and we had never tried it, there would be like this, I don't want to look stupid. Like this is the first time I'm getting in there and trying this thing that everybody knows about. And
Right.
so you kind of, it humbles you to know that you're a beginner and there's people smarter than you in the room.
And I tell you, to add to that, sometimes change happens when you don't choose it, right? I like to talk about, there are the chosen pivots and then there are the uncontrollables, right? And people will say to me now, gosh, you've made all these changes and that's so courageous and that's so, you make it look so easy, blah blah blah. Well, I'll tell you, my answer is, well, it's because I tore that band-aid off really early, meaning I had some changes that happened that humbled me, but they also made changes after that and decisions to try new things much easier, because that first ripping off of the band-aid was a very humbling experience. And it didn't feel that bad. What you rip the Band-Aid off and it's like, but then it's not so bad. But you still have people go,
Right.
oh, she's got a wound, right? Oh my gosh,
Right.
look at that. And so then you got to be okay to have that wound showing, right?
Yeah.
But it made change, that humbling allowed me to experiment more on change, and some things worked and some things didn't. And
Yeah.
that humbling and that tearing the Band-Aid off made me much more accepting. If it worked or if it didn't, at least I gave it a try, right? And being
Right.
able to not worry as much about what other people thought and being a little bit more open-minded to it.
Yes. Yeah, you make me think of when I think of forced change. I remember when my parents moved from Arkansas up to Kansas City my senior year of high school and me switching schools. And I had been with these kids in Arkansas since grade school. You know, we had grown up together. It was that type of school, 140 kids, K through 12. You just went through the whole thing.
Right.
So, when I moved, went to a high school with 500 children, 500 seniors in my
Wow.
class. I
That's
know.
all
So
change.
it was big change. I mean, it was a campus. It wasn't just a high school building, it was a campus. There were like 6 buildings that you had to walk. It's almost like a college campus. You were changing buildings throughout the day. And that year was really hard. And I remember because I was trying to make new friends, I was trying to figure out how to make friends because I'd never really had to make friends. They were just kind of given to me as a child, and then I
Right.
grew up with them.
Right.
But it humbled me because I was new to so much in the city. I didn't know anything about the city, I didn't know anything about the school. Um, then so that year was a learning experience. It tested me. At the end of the year, I was like, okay, I made it through my senior year. I had a few friends, you know, I had kind of found a little bit of a place, and it was okay. I wouldn't say at the end of the year I was celebrating, but then what I learned when I went off to college, I was a totally different person. I was like, all right, I've got this. I know how to make friends. I know how to get involved. I know what I tried last year and didn't work or what I didn't like. I know what I want to try more of. So that forced change created a new, better, I'm going to say I learned, I grew. Like it's all those things that they say change does for you. That's what happened.
And Amy, would you say that this also made your decision to move from Omaha to Kansas City easier? Meaning that people, how often did you have people look at you like, oh my gosh, that is huge. Like, how can you be doing this? Well, then you tore the Band-Aid off a long time
Right.
ago. And you saw the great things that did become of it, even though they were scary and they weren't perfect. So you knew that there could be great things. It was a chance, and you're willing to take that chance, right?
Completely. Even the move from Kansas City to Omaha 25 years ago, when we first went, you know, I was, yes, I'm going to say, once you do something big like that, it makes it easier to see the opportunities the next time. The fear gets quieted down just a little bit. It's still a little scary, but you're like, oh, it worked out fine last time. It may have taken some time, but we can do it. When we moved from Kansas City to Omaha 25 years ago and got to Omaha, my husband was of a different mindset because he had grown up in the same home his whole life and had never moved. And so for him, it was a complete um like getting him to Kansas City was challenging. And then when I said, how about we go to Omaha? He was like, what, why? What are we talking about? So, because to
I
him,
totally
like,
connect with Tom.
yeah, you like
That's how I
totally
was.
settled and you're like, I'm in there, I'm done. I don't need to do anything else. So his life experience wasn't the same as mine. And I mean, knowing that, oh, it'll be good. it'll be fine. It's just a
fine.
location. It's what you make of it.
Right. You know, there was an interesting comment that has always stuck with me when Garrett and I were both working on the healthcare startup. So let's just say this was 8 years ago. We're already, I think 10 years when I started out, but let's just say 8 years ago. So Garrett would have been in his late 40s and I would have been in my mid 40s. And the CEO that we were working with, we were trying to assess like next steps, kind of doing a forecast, what's this going to look like in 5 years. And he made the comment, he's like, well, gosh, Garrett's right at that 50-year-old age. And that's when all science shows that once you turn 50, the desire to try new things, to have any kind of change starts depletes and goes down. But his point in this whole thing was he was trying to assess how much Garrett would be on board and totally looking at the age as a circumstance of trying to expand, do new things, because that goes down after you turn 50. And I remember thinking he was crazy. It's like, because I was at an age where I'm like, I want to build the world. I was the explosive 45s. And I'm telling you, there is a difference. And at the time, you don't know what you don't know. And I thought, well, gosh, he is labeling somebody because of their age. It was a labeling to me. He was way out there. And as I got older and I turned 50, and all of a sudden I had no interest in a startup or starting like a retail business or something that really took a lot of time and energy. And then now that I'm 55 and older, I can see all those subtle changes in my desire to do new things. And the reason I bring this up is I find that science and what he said has been very accurate for me and for Garrett. Even though we are doing new things, my desire is much different at this age than it is when I was younger. But that's good to know, because without him telling me that, I don't think I'd be so cognizant of it. So that makes me say, Sandy, do try new things, which I do push myself to do. I'm going to pick up paddleboarding. Should I do rock climbing? But that lingers in my mind because I know that at my age, I'm more wired not to try new things. So I think we have to challenge ourselves and think about it as we age and know that there's a natural inclination to not do it. Now, I haven't pulled the actual science. Amy, maybe you got the article, but did you read anything that showed stats like that?
I did not. What I did read over the summer, which is kind of related to this, was a book called Strength to Strength. Did I tell you about this before?
Who wrote it?
I would have to look it up.
Okay. Keep going, because I'm thinking about the Adam Grant book. So
it is not Adam Grant. It was somebody else. I'd have to look it up. But the book talked about the science of us moving from our strength and our youth, our young adult life, and our strength as our middle-aged life. And they talked about the strength when we're young as we're innovators, where our brain is at its highest potential, like it's most effective, it's fine-tuned, and then our brain actually declines in its capacity. Can't remember the exact words, starting, I think, the late 20s. So late 20s, our brain starts declining.
Wow.
Okay. Right. But what happens is our brain, we shift into our second strength, which is our wisdom. So an innovator is creating, but the person in their second strength, they're actually able to see what people are creating and tie things together. They can see like the big picture of what this means and what it can do. So, but people struggle when they're no longer innovating. So what you said, like, you're like, oh, once I hit 50, I realized I wasn't, I didn't want to light the world on fire anymore. I just wanted to like do this thing. It was just a little different. So a lot of people struggle with accepting not being an innovator in midlife. They want to still be doing what they were in their 20s, and they kind of struggle with fighting that wisdom piece and not accepting that change in our brains. And the book went through some famous people like Darwin. Darwin died thinking he was a failure because he had done all his innovation in his 20s and early 30s. And then I know he hadn't discovered, or, the concepts that he had created in that time. He struggled because he wasn't doing more of that in his older age, which I thought was interesting.
It's very interesting. I can see how we could come to that conclusion when I like your explanation back to the wisdom. You can also look at it from the standpoint of right now, I have a lot of learnings from running around and chasing different things to say, okay, maybe I know my wisdom tells me that concept isn't going to work, or maybe I'm not a good match for being a part of that because I've learned, my wisdom has shown me. But the truth is always somewhere in the middle. I also am very selective in where I put my energy, rather than I don't have the stamina to get up at 5 every morning and go nonstop until the end of the day. And that's probably mental as much as it is physical. And I think that's a choice. When you live, I always talk about the hamster wheel. When you've lived on the hamster wheel, you can make choices too on how nice it is not to be on the hamster wheel and be a little bit more intentional. See, I'm giving us some grace and being older.
Right. Totally. That's one of the things I liked about the book, Strength to Strength, is because it was like, this is great when you're young, but this is great too. And you just have to, we're all somewhere in the middle.
Right.
All right. So other things that, for change, why do you think we're so afraid of change? I know we talked about vulnerability a little bit, but what is it that makes us like, I work with some people who are like, oh, let's try this. And they're like, brakes. No. And then I have to okay, so here are the pros to this. And you have to kind of soften it a little. And then it's like, they'll eventually come around to it. Do you ever work with people like that? And some people are like, yeah, let's go for it. But others are like, nope, wait, you want me to change something?
Fear of failure, I think, is part of it, because you kind of figure out what you have success in doing. Fear of failure, which is kind of another fancy way of saying vulnerability, right?
Right.
It takes work. Change takes work because you do have to do things differently, think about them differently. We learned a lot in the book, Atomic Habits, right? Yeah. And so there's reasons why we keep doing the same things. That's how humans are wired. And change, if change was easy, there wouldn't be so many books and coaches that are helping people through change, because we're not naturally wired to go for change. We're naturally wired to keep doing the same thing.
It's funny that you're just so smart, Sandy, because
we're gonna have 1,000 episodes on this podcast.
I know.
Well, I keep hearing
it. One of the articles I read, that resistance to change is very normal. Like, that is the norm, is to resist change. And in this article, it points out that we have neurological needs, psychological needs, social needs, and physical needs. And these all affect our resistance to change. And so the neurological needs are the need for certainty. Like, we want to know what to expect. And then the need for cerebration, which I don't know what that word is. Well, what it means is we need to think about it. Like we have to have time to process it and think about it. And then this need for routine, which is interesting that there's a need for routine, but I do also appreciate routine. So sometimes I'm like, who needs a routine? But then I realize how routine my days are. So then it's like,
I mean, the routine was what would help me out a lot back when the Band-Aid was pulled off in several different
right,
occasions. That's what I would lean into, was just some semblance of a routine. It was therapeutic.
right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Then the psychological needs are the need for self-esteem. Am I good enough? The need for confidence. I don't want to fail. There's that fear of failure. And the need for control. Do I have a choice? I love that one about do I have a choice? Because I remember that so much with my children. I always did parenting with love and logic. And that was one of the things that they said is always give your children a choice. And the choice can't be my way or the highway. It has to be, do you want to eat your apple now or do you want to eat your apple in the car on the way to practice? So it's kind of, I guess that's probably a bad example. You don't want to force your kid to eat, but something like that. Or do you want to put your socks on now or in the car? Whatever it is, but giving them some control. Then the next is social needs, which is the need for meaningful relationships. What will other people think? That has a lot to do with change. And the physical needs, security and comfort. What does this mean for me?
Those are very interesting. Having spent my whole career as a consultant, as a label, organizations, people within organizations would hate it when the consultants would come in. You know why? The consultants were paid to come up with changes. Even if everything was good, you're paid to make recommendations. What's a recommendation? That you can do things better or differently. So it was always, oh, here are the consultants. That means, because that's what follow the dollar. Even if we're doing great, they're going to have us change things because that's how they're getting paid. That's what they're brought in for.
Right.
But it was always a little bit of a conflict because right away it'd be digging the heels in. Everything's fine the way it is.
Right.
Typically.
I will tell you, because when I've consulted, I've had um my I've had HR bring me in to help people in the company that are struggling with their organization and productivity, their time management, focus management, all that stuff. And some people have asked for the help, and those relationships usually go really well.
Right.
When somebody has been identified needing the help and told that they're getting help
Right.
from me, those relationships do not go as well.
I'm talking about the B in my equation, not the A, because the A is like, I brought it in, this is great. And then B, the one that's like, oh, they brought it because of me.
Yeah, exactly. So, which creates this, the dynamic. It's very hard to overcome. All right, how are we doing on time? Are we doing good?
I think we should probably wrap up.
It is that time, isn't it? I know we chatted a little beforehand, which isn't normal for us. So it was lovely to catch up with you.
And now about we'll have to come back and say what one thing we changed this week, right?
Right. Sandy, thank you as always for this great conversation. I hope it inspires people to do things a little different, maybe spice things up, have a little fun.
Vulnerability is good for everyone, right?
Yes, it is.
All right,
Thanks, Sandy.
Amy.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.